Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are in the world today, you're on the new way with Dr. Lenny Time, in a new way where we stretch the borders of reality and question everything we thought we knew and weigh it again so that what we synthesize is the essence of reality. The world we live in today definitely does not appear to be real. It appears to be real, REEL, as though it were created by some entity using computer graphics and changing the way we look at things artificially in order to establish what I will call a timeline. The timeline has a fixed narrative, and the narrative of the timeline is broad enough to include many different timelines in different scales. The scale that we work on here is called human scale, and it stretches from 1 human to 8 billion humans, and anything smaller than a human is not on human scale, and anything bigger than 8 billion humans is not on human scale. But life is on all scales, at least down to the atomic scale. And so we've got some thinking to do that requires us to climb outside of the box. So today my guest is Upcycle Club from Grim Grizz's network, and I'd like to introduce him to you now. This is Harris, Upcycle Club. Can you tell us a bit about yourself, Harris?
Yes, of course, Doctor. First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here in this live stream, in this timeline. And I really appreciate the asynchronous aspect of these streams. So hello, everyone watching this live, and hello, everyone watching this in the future. So yes, as you said, I am a follower of General Griswold Gaius Grimm, and I am a lobster monkey. And this has to do with a lot of different skills, let's say. But one of them is like that I crawl into the web as if a web crawler, let's say. And I try to pick up different gems or clips that I can bring back to the village. That is known as the Unbroken Clock Tower. That is the Discord server that Grimm has. So I've joined that server back in early December, and hello Neutrino. And basically, I'm trying to be an active member since then. And one of the things that I am really enjoying is that it's not only Grimm's channel. As Grimm himself often says, there is a flotilla of channels within this little corner that is known as TLC. And one of them being your channel, Dr. Lenny. And I really enjoy your live streams. It's something different that you cannot, I cannot personally find in the other channels. It also has to do with these topics around not only time, but also some science, let's say. I know you are really into chemistry, as you've said many times. I'm not so much into chemistry. I am more a mathematics guy. I'm really into something called primality. That is all. It has to do with prime numbers. I know that you appreciate numbers in terms of the Fibonacci sequence. So some of those numbers, they are actually primes. So like 2 and 3, but not 1. for example. So that's about it. This is what I wanted to say in terms of introducing myself. And once again, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you.
I had the privilege of editing a book in mathematics called Numeronomy.
Mm-hmm.
And it was written by Bob Marshall, who worked with Buckminster Fuller in the 1960s and was a mathematical savant. And he had a method of predicting prime numbers, and it was graphic.
Okay.
And so you could actually see the numbers when they were, because a lot of prime numbers were one less than multiples of several numbers. So if you multiply 2 times 3 times 4 times 5, or 2 times 3 times 5, 4 is not prime. 2 times 3 is 6, times 5 is 30, 29 is prime.
Yeah. And also plus 1, it's also prime, 31. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there was a lot of different things in mathematics that make sense to me as a chemist, but chemistry, physics, and biology are all based on the language of mathematics, which, as you know, requires proof.
Mm-hmm.
And mathematical proof has to be established in order for a relationship to be validated within science.
Yeah.
I think that has taken people well off page because A, most people don't really take the time to understand mathematics, and B, each of those different hard sciences has developed their own language embedding mathematics differently in what they present than what we would actually assign to them.
Okay, that's very interesting what you said. I very recently got introduced into the work of Fuller. He wrote a very famous book apparently, and he explains a bit about this visualization of the structures that are embedded within, let's say, space-time. And there are also some architectural elements into it. And when I started reading a bit about that book, I got introduced to it during a recent a lecture that I took part that had to do with Sean McFadden, and he's a collaborator at the Max Planck Institute, and he insisted that we read this Buckminster Fuller book. So when I started reading those few chapters that he recommended, I realized that the way he was presenting and even presenting his thoughts, let's say, and his results in mathematics were very well in line with the way I am thinking. So to be honest, in the past, I got the chance to present some of my results in pure mathematics in one channel that is well known within this little corner. It's the Meaning Code that is hosted by an excellent lady, Karen Wong. So I got the chance to approach her, and she was very welcoming, and she ended up having like 5 different talks that can be found on her channel. And one of the main things that I presented there was actually proof. Because I am a bit old school, I agree totally with what you said about mathematics. It's all about proof. This is not a very well-respected view these days, because a lot of people, they are just liking to perform, let's say, experiments. This is the approach that is being propounded by the physicists, basically, the mathematical physicists. But the old school approach of the ancient Greeks, let's say, is that you are trying to get a proof. Because a proof, it's like it is as if it's the most basic level of what we call truth. And I presented my results. It had to do with something very technical, and I know I have heard you in the past talking about this, but I don't think it's exactly the same matter. My results had to do with group theory. It had to do with mathematics and group theory. I guess you are referring to group theory in chemistry. Okay, so there is also group theory in mathematics. It has to do with specifically with the finite symmetry groups that they are called the sporadics. There is 26 of them, and the biggest one of them is called the monster. It's the monster group, and there is also the baby monster, and there are. So I've managed to come up with a theorem, let's say, after a long time researching about it, and then I came up with a proof, and my proof had to make an indirect connection, let's say, between prime numbers, and particularly twin prime numbers, and this moonshine theory that has to do with the monster group, and then the other of the sporadics. So this is my background story, let's say, in terms of mathematics and proofs.
The group theory in chemistry relies a lot on matrix algebra and on symmetry. And so the point groups would be like water's point group is C2V, which means it has a vertical plane of symmetry and it has a 180-degree rotation plane. And that means that for the viewers who are listening, it means if you rotate a water molecule halfway around, it looks the same as it would otherwise. Now, one of the things I have been doing, and a shout out to Karen who popped in earlier, is working to establish a field called sociochemistry, in which the mathematics of chemistry group theory is applied to the social structure. Since the relationship of physics to chemistry to biology is supposed to be that physics underpins chemistry and chemistry underpins biology, and the soft sciences of psychology, sociology, and economics have the same relationship. Economics underpins sociology, which underpins psychology. Then psychology and biology should have the same mathematics. Chemistry and sociology should follow the same mathematics, and physics and economics should follow the same mathematics. And so right now we live in a world where the economic paradigm has been totally shattered, and that nothing really makes sense because everything has become a chase for the essential dollar. And there has to be a different way of coming through with ideas that are able to establish a system of exchange that is non-economic in value. In establishing groups, I've been establishing groups of different sizes for a long time and applying the Fibonacci sequence as a measure of the size of the group. so that two Fibonacci numbers that are greater than 3 steps apart are not related to each other in a way that groups of those, when they have similarities, those similarities are fractal to each other. And so my distance between fractals is pi 3.14. And so it's one of those things that's a minimum distance, not a maximum distance. But I've conceptualized that humans on human scale exist on all scales, and that all scales are normalized to human scale. One lifetime equals 80 years. And so whether we were on a microsecond scale or a 26,000 year scale, we couldn't tell from human scale because it all seems like the same 80 years.
Okay, this is what you said now in this section is very interesting, and I can see some connections. Personally, I really studied not only cognition because I am actively working with a soft computing technique called fuzzy cognitive maps for many years, almost more than 2 decades. So not only I'm studying cognition, but also psychology. And particularly, I don't like Freud. I like Jung, so Jungian psychology. So one of the things that the reasons that Jung fascinates me, let's say, it's because he coined this term synchronicity based on his work with a physicist, Pauli. So there is a lot of connection going on there that let's say mainstream academia, they didn't actually catch up back in the days, back in the early 50s, that this pioneering work was being made. And only now they are starting to look a bit again into it. So of course I see this connection between different disciplines, and I would like to offer this also this pair with psychology and physics, or even quantum mechanics. So this is something that also goes hand in hand. The other thing I wanted to add there, because you talk about economics, which I fully agree, and socioeconomics and all of that, I just wanted to add another discipline that it's a bit underrated, namely in geography. And there is one law known as the Toppler's first law of geography, that near things they are. Let me just find it exactly how it is. I don't want to make an error here. First law of geography. Okay, so this law, according to Walter Toppler, it states the following: everything is related to everything else, but near things are more related than distant things. So in this sense, we understand that there is this notion of proximity. I would like to make another parallel now with the notion of coming from filmography and let's say the medium of film. There was, if I am not mistaken, it was the great silent actor Charlie Chaplin that said that life in a close-up, it's like a tragedy, but on a long shot, it's like comedy. So you have these different versions of the proxemic distance, and actually you can understand this in terms of basic movements of the camera and how the big picture gets, let's say, panned out or zoom in. So that's something else I wanted to add. It's not only economics and psychology and all of that, I also believe in the value of geography, and also this first law of Toppler. And I have this hunch that it can play an important role in the future in terms of novel quantum theories. So this is what I wanted to share at this point regarding that.
I have looked at geography before, and there's two things that get me about geography. One, it seems to be the primary means of making sure that the electoral process in the US remains fixed and stagnant, because they take the geography to make a congressional district and they move the borders around so that solid Republican districts get Democratic participation enough to disenfranchise those Democrats. And they do the same thing with the Democratic seats that are already presupposed, because, quite frankly, you have, once you're elected, you have the power of the office to run with you, and there's no option. If you're not unelected the first time you run for re-election, you can have it as many times as you want in Congress, and there's no problem. Second thing about geography, and maybe even more telling, is this thing about Mandela effects. Mandela effects are things that don't make sense because in the memory that we have, it's out of step with what's currently thought to be. And most people think Mandela effects are in movies or rock videos or things like that. But there's one person on the internet named Chick who broadcasts on YouTube who talks about geographic anomalies. And since she has pointed out what's going on, the globe, if we don't believe in flat Earth, has changed significantly, such that if you look at a globe right now, South America is almost closer to Africa than it is in line with North America. But yet when I was growing up looking at maps, South America and North America shared a vertical alignment. The country of Cuba has grown about 50 times the size that it was portrayed in maps, and we still don't have a map of what Antarctica looks like. So I'm convinced that geography is fungible and can change, but it's taught as a fixed subject, and I don't know, they keep changing the names of places.
Yeah. What you said about maps, this is actually true. There is one of the main problems that I know, that I am aware of in terms of geography, is the capacity to make a good map. And there is a lot of maps that they just misrepresent different nations. They squash some, they make other look bigger, let's say, than they are. So it also has to do with, it goes back to mathematics in a way, how you can create a good map without distorting the dimensions of it. And yeah, as you said, maybe since we are not talking about flat Earth here, even though I believe that the universe is flat, but the Earth I don't believe that the Earth is flat, but the universe may be flat. So that's something else. So going back to cartography, there are many different ways to construct a map. Now, reverting a bit to your first point regarding the elections and the role of the different borders, the only thing I can add at that point is that politicians, they exercise policy measures, and in order to achieve, let's say, one objective that they target together, but they utilize it particularly, let's say, as you said, in terms of elections and changing maybe the electoral dynamics from one region to the other. So let's say, for example, if they decide to connect two different regions for a reason, that will actually probably change the dynamic in the next elections that will take place. So yeah, maybe it has to do with political power games and their silent use of policy in order to achieve that.
Yeah, I think that most of what we have as policy now is handed down by a small group of people who they have a lot of minions in the world,
Mhm.
so that a lot of people have been educated. And the more highly educated you are, the narrower you become in scope. So that while my PhD is in chemistry, what that means is that I apply chemistry to everything that I come into and try and balance equations and make sense of it. But most PhDs do not take that role. What they do is they believe what they said and they get to a cutting edge problem that is micro minuscule, so they can be the only person in the world that actually understands the context of the problem. And to earn a degree at the university, what you essentially have to do is be able to teach your professors something they didn't know. And because all the professors come up in the system, you must base all your work on things that are already established. So just like in mathematics, in chemistry, we're citing papers of what people said and how they performed their experiments and so forth.
Yeah.
It was one of those things that don't make sense when you question them, but because the dogma is instilled, it doesn't require sense. You just have to take it as a given.
Yeah.
So, as a scientist, one of the first things that I try and do is establish the givens, because I do not believe that most of things that we are given are correct.
Mhm.
And my assumption is that if this is correct and this is correct and this is correct, then so forth and so on. But it's
I,
funny how the dogmas over trump the reality. And now, in the US at least, we have a university system that is established to put people in permanent debt.
that is an awful practice, by the way. I can understand the capitalistic machinery behind it. This is like a trap. I've been looking into that particular problem that is happening in the United States for quite some time. Let's. My hope is that they will. How do you say? They will strike off that debt. That's the only thing I can think of as a solution. Because if they continue on doing this, everybody is going to be destroyed. Like the quality level of the quality of life, even it's going to be heavily affected. And I can see that this trend is going downwards. So there are different models of education, at least in Europe. I'm not saying about the educational model in Cyprus, but I can quote, let's say, for example, the Scandinavian countries. they are having a completely different mentality. Like, for example, they propose that schools should be reduced down to 4 hours, and there shouldn't be any, let's say, homework, or homework should be kept at a minimum of 15 minutes maximum per child. So they give different priorities, like outdoor activities, playing music, performing the arts, all of these things that they are let's say, against what is happening now in the United States with the SATs and all of that. And this continuing struggle to get accepted to the best university and all of that goes with it.
I think that this device is insane in the hands of children.
Mm-hmm.
That when you get to the point where the children believes the reality of the screen ahead of the reality of outside, that there's a disconnect.
Yeah.
I think we've reached a point where the concept of helicopter parenting has gotten excessive in this country, that they have demonized people interaction so that parents are afraid if somebody engages their child that it's going to be kidnapping and mass murder, and that is worth screaming about and causing a disturbance in the field of force, giving the child great embarrassment, missing a learning experience, and having to deal with an insanity of parenting.
Yeah. First of all, sorry for interrupting. I just wanted to add that there must be a good reason for them to call it smartphone. So it all has to do with branding and maybe brainwashing. So this is this device is gonna make you smart. So start using it.
The word smart was a mnemonic.
Yeah.
And I don't remember exactly what SMART stands for, but there are, each of the letters of SMART has to do with something. But now the Internet of Things and the fact that everything is a spy device means that we can have this conversation live on YouTube and say things that can be taken out of context by anybody, but the AI that is recording this takes little notes and makes sure that if you and I were to say something that is in disagreement with what is commonly believed, which is probably everything we're talking about, we will be shadow banned. And that people who know how to find this station will find it and be able to hear the conversation, but it'll get out to less than 100 people because I've only got 69 subscribers at this point.
Yeah, you are correcting what you say. Regarding the smart being a mnemonic device, you are also correct. Smart means specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. So it also has to do with time once more. What you said about this shadow banning is true. I've also noticed it happening. And in a way, there are some, there are some YouTubers. Like, for example, there is a Professor Edward Dutton that Green often mentions him. He's doing something very smart. He live streams, and then he removes the live stream and places it in Odyssey or in other platforms, because he knows if he's gonna leave it there, it's gonna get shadow banned or maybe copyright strike or whatever. So he's being extra cautious in that sense. Yeah.
So tell me your opinions on artificial intelligence and the current use of it on the internet.
Okay. Thank you for this interesting question. Now, first of all, I am, even although I am dealing with artificial intelligence, let's say, me personally, I stand strongly against it. First of all, I don't like the term artificial. I don't even believe that in artificial intelligence. Once I got accepted into a PhD program, because I pitched to the doctors, to the professors there, about me wanting to do a PhD on artificial stupidity. So, and I got accepted in those terms. I didn't pursue it, but at least I replied to myself if I was going to get accepted or not. So I don't believe in artificiality. I don't believe in artificial intelligence per se. What I do believe, it's in something called synthetic intelligence. So synthetic intelligence is, just to give you one example, there is, imagine the case of a diamond. Okay, there is the naturally grown diamond that it takes, let's say, natural processes like pressure and probably billions of years to be made. And there is also a laboratory grown diamond that only takes, for example, 10 or 16 weeks or how much to be grown in laboratory settings. And also now imagine a simulated diamond that exists within a computer simulation, like a video game. So if I compare these three, the natural diamond, that's the real thing. If I take the synthetic one, maybe you have some very nice spectrography or a chemical test to distinguish it with the other one, with the natural one. But it's still a valid diamond. It's like, it's not a fake one. It's not faux. It's not made of something else. And then take the case of the artificially made diamond that exists only within the simulation of the virtual environment of a game. It doesn't, it's not in any terms real, let's say. It's so this is how I also understand the difference between intelligences. Like there is human intelligence that me personally, I put above everything else. And then there is other forms of intelligence. There is animal intelligence, there is synthetic intelligence, and last at the very, very bottom, I place artificial intelligence as the most of the scientists put it as it stands. Nevertheless, I am a bit, I wouldn't be fair if I do not include into this view of mine the latest development that took place in terms of large language models over the last year, let's say, with Chat and GPT and BART and all of that. Indeed, there is some sort of glimpses of something like general intelligence, let's say there. But it's not something that still it qualifies as such. And even maybe in the next year or even maybe within this year, they manage to pass the Turing test, still it wouldn't be like a general purpose intelligence. I believe that labor should be kept for human beings. Personally, this is my belief. So,
I might tend to agree with you on that. I think that constructed intelligence or synthetic intelligence is programming.
mhm.
And somebody had to program it initially. And with the Chat GPT being able to give you and I the ability to program it, we can say, hey, take a Led Zeppelin theme and make it into a Beatles song, And lo and behold, there's new music by the Beatles. And it really sounds like Stairway to Heaven, but it sounds like the Beatles doing it.
Yeah.
And so I'm convinced that they're making up things that aren't and putting them into the field of possibility, and that the individual human perspective can get lost in believing what the synthetic intelligence says or what their professors say at the university. It's interesting that when I got to grad school, one of the very first things they told me was to forget everything you learned in college. And then when I got to my postdoc, I had to apply what I had learned in my graduate work to a different field of application.
Mhm.
And it just so happened that my specialty was interfacing microcomputers and the new thing on the desk, the PC, to instruments in the laboratory, so that the laboratory instruments could collect the data in an automated fashion. So I would set up an experiment that would need 3 hours to do a Fourier transform, which required a couple thousand scans. And then I'd get on Internet Relay Chat, IRC, and talk to people at other universities in real time and play games on the computer.
Hmm.
And now we do not have the capabilities that I was using in the 1980s, and we are given apps so that no program is required to run the computer and get what you need, but it's all controlled and it's all going into a database. And that I believe what artificial intelligence has done is taken the whole of production that's been on the internet and mined it, so that they have essentially stolen everything that the individuals who have worked honestly to come up with new ideas and techniques, and the AI searches everything in a matter of moments and then feeds us back our own information, and oh, there's a price tag on it.
Exactly as you said. And not only this, there is a horrendous hypocrisy that I see, because me personally, I am into something called OSINT, open source intelligence. Okay. There are, as I told you, there are many different types of intelligence, and some of them have to do with communicating intelligence, not only, let's say, artificial or synthetic or whatever. So there is human, that is human intelligence, there is signal intelligence, there are many different types. One of them is open source intelligence, and has to do with the how we utilize information and open source tools. So nothing behind paywalls. So one of these elements of hypocrisy that I am calling out on them is that everyone within academia, they really hate Wikipedia. They absolutely hate it. They hate it. They say, no, you should go and do your research with the journals and all of this and all of that. Okay, I accept that view. But why I call them hypocrites? Because the artificial agents that now got introduced in our lives, they actually stole everything from Wikipedia. They took all the nice structure from the different interdisciplinary domains that Wikipedia has, and none of them they can claim that doesn't work, because it does, because someone, a lot of people, let's say the collective intelligence, sat down and created these three structures with the different branches of knowledge and disciplines and facts and events and all of that. So instead of investing millions in order to create their own knowledge structures, to put it in knowledge elicitation or knowledge acquisition terms, they steal the Wikipedia structure. And they present it to us as if it's something they came up with, and that it's something that it took them, it cost them millions and millions, and now they have to charge a lot of money for us to access that. So I know this in a way from the inside, let's say. I don't want to disclose anything more, but this is a story that goes back in 2015 and even before. So yeah, this is what they did, and this is why I'm calling them hypocrites.
Let me shift gears on you to another thing that I think is related to our discussion of time that I'm trying to suss out, and that is the concept of consciousness. How do you think consciousness arises, and what is the extent of consciousness within the world structure?
Okay, so first of all, at this point, I have to mention Professor Donald Hoffman, that I really share some of his views, not everything, but I would like to, how do you say? I would like to make a short reference to his main views. So, and I will tell you where I fully agree with him, where I almost agree, and where I slightly disagree. So, his main three views are the following. Space and time are not fundamental. He actually calls that space-time is doom. For me, that's a radical view to call it like that, but I agree with the main bulk of what he's saying, that space and time are both non-fundamental, but they are rather emerging properties of the system that we are embedding in and we call a universe. The second view of Donald Hoffman is that consciousness is fundamental. So I partially agree with that. What I believe, it's slightly indifferent. I believe that it is conscious computation that is fundamental. So it's a slight different view that they also incorporate mathematics and maybe those nice Platonic structures we know as the Platonic solids and whatever. And just to conclude, the main view of Professor Donald Hoffman is that he concludes basically that we live in a simulation. Okay. I do not go by that opinion. And the reason is the same as what I have explained before with the lab-grown diamond and the artificial diamond. So I don't believe we live in a simulation. I believe we live in an emulation. So there is some slight differences there. Maybe you can say that I am being pedantic and that I am playing with semantics there, but I really believe that this is what distinguishes my view with his, let's say. But I also can see some, how do you say, some nice overlaps there. So this basically sums things up for me.
Okay. I'd like to take the time now to bring on my friend Bruce and allow him to ask either you or I questions that he might have from the discussion that we've had. Good morning again, Bruce.
Hello, Bruce.
Howdy ho. I don't have any specific questions. I've been listening and digesting, but I don't think I have anything of real value to offer in addition to what you guys have already come up with. Excuse me.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say I'll bring you back after the show and we can talk once we're done because I have a couple more questions that I could ask Harris.
Sure, sure. So yeah, that's perfectly fine with me. Yeah.
Okay. When we're talking about consciousness,
Mhm.
the concept of morphic resonance, which Rupert Sheldrake has come up with, strikes me as right on. Are you familiar with Sheldrake's work, and can you relate his morphic resonance to some of the stuff that is in your belief on the topic of
Okay.
consciousness?
I believe I'm not fully familiar with his work. I am aware of it though. If just tell me if I am correct in what I am gonna say. It has to do with cymatics, this morphic resonance. It's that idea that is
Not,
behind.
not exactly.
Okay. So,
Somatics has to do with turning wavelengths to certain frequencies that then cause a resonance that forms patterns in the wave function.
mhm.
What Sheldrake says is that morphic resonance is a pattern behind the scene that most things will recognize the pattern once it's been presented, and then the pattern will come out in more and more things because more and more people have recognized it. So it's more like the 100th monkey game, where the one monkey decided to wash his food and the next monkey decided, hey, that guy's washing his food, I'll wash my food. And by the time 100 monkeys on the island were washing their food, all monkeys all over the world had the idea to wash their food.
Mhm.
And so that something in the field expands outward that includes knowledge in a domain, and he called that morphic resonance.
Okay. Thank you for explaining that. So yeah, as I told you, I'm not very familiar of his work, but that was a good explanation, and I think I understood the gist of it. So just to try to offer my own perspective here, I understand consciousness in terms of. Do you know how there are some sort of invasive species of bamboo that the way they actually sprout is like they don't go like upwards and creating this bamboo, but they actually spread in a way branching off beneath the soil. So a time of the year comes and you can see from a single how do you call it, substrate, let's say, from a single plant, you will see a lot of different sproutings take place in actually in distance. And there is one, let's say, theory that says that all of the bamboo that growing that take place, it is as if that it's taking place at the same time from exactly the same plant. So it is as if everything is connected like a mycelium that is below the surface, that in a synergistic way it communicates and expands and sprouts and all of that. So this is how I understand consciousness. There is a deeper pattern below the surface. According to the levels of access that each different cognitive agent has. Now I'm speaking a bit with in Vervagian language, but I think it may be appropriate. So different cognitive agents have different access levels, and according to how familiar they are or how close to the source they are, they get to experience this event at different times. Like if I am closer to the source of the event, now I'm trying to put it in a slightly different words. If I am closer to witnessing the unfolding of an event, that means that I get access to that information before everyone else. It doesn't mean that because I am doing so, others will not also do it, but it means that maybe I have access to that type of information, let's say, before others. That's how I understand it. And now, if we go some years back, let's say, before the introduction of technology and all of this, and we imagine the role that, let's say, in a village, there was the so-called elders, that people, they were going there to get some advice. What those elders they were doing, they were actually interpreting the underlying patterns of the unfolding event, and because they had previous knowledge of what happened, they informed everyone else about what was going to happen in the near future. So in a way, they were performing a conscious computation that was based on memory. And this is in a very, let's say, abstract way, how I think and how I conceive this, and how I even wrestle with this deep question of time.
I tend to think that if I am embedded in an event, I can lose all my time perspective, so that if I'm doing research and it's on a deadline, no matter when I finish the research, no matter how much time it took me to do it, I beat the deadline by a couple of minutes. But it's almost as if I've opened a window of time portal and gotten hours in my time portal that didn't take place in the standard of time. But then at some other point in life, I have to return those 3 hours, and I'll have a blank where I just do not remember what happened, because those 3 hours were effectively given to the research project that I was on.
Okay, this is great. I understand this 100%. Okay, I think it has to do with the different type of researcher you were at that particular moment and at that particular time, let's say. Maybe it has to do even with the nature of the research project. So maybe also it has to do with other aspects, like more internal. Like if your character is, let's say, more of a procrastinator, then you will push it. And most people, they are procrastinators, basically. They will push it towards the deadline. And then somehow you will manage to put in the effort that, let's say, another researcher took 6 months to do, to deliver that same research proposal or whatever. You will do it in 6 hours. So in a way, you broke time during that period. So and if it's a successful project proposal, then it's great, right? Because you managed to indeed not only break time phenomenologically, but also you got the stamp that we are gonna fund your project or whatever. So I understand that. What I am really interested in is what you said about the last part. Like you heavily invest 3 hours there, and they got removed in the future from somewhere else. That part I found very interesting, and because it has to do with this energy that you placed extra energy during those hours, let's say, and you were eventually gonna take it. It's gonna be deduced in the future, right?
It has to be balanced like an equation in chemistry.
Yeah.
Now, I've also noticed that Dr. Seuss brought in that concept in his book, Oh, the Places We Can Go. Dr. Seuss is one of the very best philosophers, and he writes children's books, at least in most people's minds. But those books are extremely deep philosophically, and he described the waiting place, waiting for the train to come. And if you get to the point where you can put yourself in the waiting place, you can make 15 minutes seem like 6 hours because you're waiting for something to happen and time artificially goes slower. But earlier there was a comment by Stephanie that I think I'd like you to address. Do you have a sense of time speeding up? If so, possibly because of exponential growth of technology or because the universe is expanding at an increasing rate?
Yeah.
Can you
Okay.
address that?
Yeah. First of all, I do believe that the universe is expanding, and that it is expanding in a exponential rate, and it is speeding up, let's say. So I even have some results that confirm that view, and so it's not only that I believe it because I read about it somewhere in a research paper or whatever, but I actually tried to prove it to myself because I was curious about it. So I have this sense of time being fluid, to be honest, and maybe it's technology that affects things, maybe not. Maybe it's psychotechnologies. I'm using another term that it is used as a buzzword. Psychotechnologies, in this sense, can be anything. It can even be, how do you say, that we're having this discussion, and we're having this dialectical process, let's say. This can be understood as a meta psychotechnology. So it's like it's a cognitive tool that, because we engage in it in a three-way, because it's Dr. Thyme, it's Apps, and it's also Stephanie. So in this asynchronous manner, we are able to engage in this dialectic process. So if it wasn't for Tim Berners-Lee, the creator or the inventor of the internet, that he invented back in the day because he was working in CERN, if I am not mistaken, we wouldn't be able to do this right now. So this wouldn't happen. So now I'm going back to the notion of this time being fluid. Like it depends on something that took place in the past, and that thing that took place in the past maybe affects even this moment right now.
Well,
Maybe, yeah.
I think that human scale operates on the current narrative in our consciousness, but I think that the major timeline of humans on this earth has bypassed us, that certain events took place in cognizant recognition of most of the people on earth that provided a different result from what we managed to experience. And so that many of the people who are currently on Earth are what I would call NPCs, non player characters,
Mhm.
because their consciousness has left this particular narrative to go on a logical stream of thought of a different result from the narrative. I like to say that it would be as though in 80% of people's worlds, Hillary Clinton had beaten Donald Trump in the 2016 election, but that those of us who had Trump winning ended up in this parallel universe. And then when they stole the election in 2020 to give it to 80 million people voted for Joe Biden, that was a second fork in that road, so that most people that are traditional thinkers in terms of the political structure are no longer in this particular created narrative.
Yeah.
And so our timeline has peeled off from the mainstream of time. But remember, I said it was all fractal, and that the narrative repeats on different fractals, and that a fractal that has your 80-year human life existing in a microsecond allows a lot of concurrent timelines with the same narrative to happen where actions can make a difference. But then, if the action does make a difference and causes a fork off the timeline, that new timeline is repeated on a longer scale, maybe a second, so that instead of being resolved in milliseconds, in real time, it now takes a whole second to resolve. And again, thousands of millions of concurrent timelines are there looking for something that goes off at a tangent. And then if that happens, maybe the next timeline is 80 human years to 80 human years, and we're in real time doing whatever it is we're doing. And if that works, maybe 80 human years is a century, and so forth. So that significant work gets recorded on unique timelines, and the buildup to get there from here is one of continually being knocked off path. On the other hand, the opposite happens also, where as things are decisions that are made and the timelines have diverged, and there is no essential difference between the decision, the timelines come back together and merge into a distinct narrative. But maybe the Kit Kat bar now has a hyphen in it, or the VW has a line between the V and the W, or other things that people remember as being one way are now not exactly the same, because two distinct timelines that follow the same narrative slightly differently have merged.
Okay. What you said is it's very interesting. First of all, I really like the fact that you talk about concurrency, which is a very nice concept. Most people know about what running in parallel is, but concurrency is something different that actually allows room for understanding and even interpreting the various processes that take place in the world in this concurrent manner. So imagine that, at least this is the way I personally understand it. For me, every individual human is like a personal system, and these systems interact in a concurrent way with each other. So that That's one thing. Now, I wanted to go back to the politics. As I said during my interview last year with Karen Wong, I'm not into politics. I'm into policy and policy design, but I'm also into something called mimetics. Okay, so back in 2015, I was, me and my team basically, but it was mostly me, we were able to predict that Trump was going to win the 2016 elections. And we did it not because we were extremely smart or anything like that. It was because we performed an analysis of the memes. Like we saw the actual volume of the memes that was emerging from the deep web, from places like 4chan and all of that. This wave, let's say it was like a tsunami. So there wasn't at least in our perspective from the vantage point of being from a small country in the Mediterranean, for us it was like clearly the case that Trump was going to win back then. So one of the, I was discussing this with one professor friend of mine, and he told me, you know what you should have done? You should have bet on it with the bookies, like that Trump was going to win. And I go to him, I'm not into making bets or making money in that sense. So I just wanted to highlight that because there is some sort of underrated sciences like mimetics, like mimetic engineering and all of this. And that's one of the reasons I really appreciate and enjoy Grimm's channel. Because for me, he's like a mastermind in mimetics. So I learned a lot of things from the general, and one of the things that I really acknowledge that he's really good is this deep understanding of mimetics. Now, just to conclude that comment regarding the elections. There was something called the meme veteran wars that had to do with the election back in 2016. And it was that type of mimetic warfare, to call it in that technical term. It was won by that particular political party. So during the next year, the next elections, what happened, I don't know what actually took place. I leave that assessment to you because you are a citizen of the United States. But I just wanted to add this mimetic perspective from our side, let's say, from outside the US. So, yeah.
Well, I'm going to thank you for your presence, ask you to hang on for some conversation after the show. And I see we're coming up to 75 minutes, and I like to try and keep to about an hour because attention spans no longer really go. But this is a great conversation, and I'd like to continue it both now and in the future. So you're welcome back again, and we will talk both in the general stream and in this stream and behind the scenes, because there's a lot more to time than most people realize.
It was a pleasure, Dr. Lenny, and an honor.
Okay. And I'd like to thank the audience once again for staying with us and making pertinent comments. I believe that everything that we do happens in multiple timelines, but that our consciousness being in a single timeline is the governor for how things work in each of our own personal realities and how it comes back into a general reality that we can work on at both ends of the human scale. So, with that, I'll tell you to be well and to be well.